Welcome to this Impressive Buttons tutorial. Today, you will learn how to write a basic script using the Udon graph editor. You will also learn how to set up your very own button from scratch. Make sure that your Unity project is all set up as I explained in the first Impressive Buttons tutorial. In order to follow this tutorial, you will have to update your Udon Sharp and Impressive Buttons package to their latest versions. At the time of this recording, that is Udon Sharp 0.18.3 and Impressive Buttons 1.1. After downloading these packages from their official sources, you can drag them into your Unity project one at a time. I would drag the new version of Udon Sharp into your project first, as Impressive Buttons depends on it. After doing so, you can press the Import button, which will automatically update your Udon Sharp. After that's done, you can do the same for Impressive Buttons. Let's start by making a Udon script using the Udon graph editor. To do this, go to somewhere within your Unity project in the file hierarchy, right-click, Create, VRChat, Udon, Udon graph program asset. Give it an appropriate name. For this example, I'm going to make a graph script that enables a game object. After naming it, go to the top right of your screen and press Open Udon Graph. Welcome to the Udon Graph Editor. It's a two-dimensional space where you can make scripts using visual blocks of code. To add a new piece of code, you can right-click anywhere within the field and go into Create Node. This will give you a list of all of the possible things that Udon can execute. For our example, we will only be needing a single block of code, which is to enable the game object. To do this, we can go into the search bar and look for a game object, because we are looking to do something to a game object. When pressing it, we will get a list of all of the functions that are available for a game object. We are interested in setActive, because we want to enable the game object. So when we press that, we get a new code block that represents this function. We will also need a variable that refers to the game object that we wish to enable. So here in the Variables tab, we can go plus and look for game object. That gives us a new variable of the type game object, which we can name to whichever we please, like target or something. Then we can take this variable and drag it into our field, which will turn it into a code block we can interact with. We can take this game object and drag it into the instance field on the other code block, which will tell it that we want to enable this specific game object. The second variable in the game object setActive function is a value that is either true or false, which is called a boolean, or a bool for short. In our case, we want to set this value to true or on because we want the game object to show. Finally, we need a way to trigger this setActive function, which in our case we want to do with our button. In a regular button in VRChat, you would go for a interact event, which is under events interact. But because we are using Impressive Buttons, we need to refer to a custom event, which is called event custom. When you press that, you get a very similar thing, but it has a text field, which we want to fill with onPress. Watch your capitalization, because that's what the Impressive Button package is looking for. Then you can drag this custom event into the trigger field of this game object setActive. So now, whenever this onPress event is triggered on this game object, it will be set to active. So let's test this out. Let's exit the Udon graph by going back to our scene view and add this behavior to a game object. In this case, I will be adding it to this cube, which will start off disabled. We'll add a component, Udon behavior, and add our new Udon program into the Udon behavior, which is enable object, which we just made. Oh, I actually forgot something. As you can see in this list of public variables, there is none, even though we added that target game object. So let's go back into the Udon graph, go under this target variable, and check the public checkbox. Now, if we save and go back to the scene view, we should be able to see that target field where we can drag the cube into itself so it knows which game object to enable. Now, if I go into this spare button object that I made, I can take our disabled cube game object and drag it into the send onPress event to field. If we save and run the scene, we should be able to see that everything works and that the button enables the cube. Let's make an impressive button from scratch. What I like to do is go into my scene hierarchy, right click and create a new empty. This is just a coordinate in 3D space that gives us a reference point to work from. First thing I like to do is add a collider to this game object, because it's required for desktop users to press the button. So we can go into add component and search for box collider. Right now it's pretty difficult to see, so I like to go into wireframe mode, which makes it a lot more obvious where your hitbox is. So I'm going to scale this hitbox to about 0.2 on all axes, because I don't want the button to be huge. And 0.2 is a pretty decent size, in my opinion, for a button in VR chat. Then I can go back into the shaded view. We also need to add a sound component, because the button makes sounds, obviously. So to do that, we can look for VRC space spatial audio source. And that adds a sound source to a VR chat game object. Under the VRC spatial audio source, I like to change a few variables that makes the sound source more realistic. So first I changed the var value to 5, which means that the furthest away you can hear the button from is 5 meters. And then under advanced options, I like to set the near to 3. I think those are pretty good settings to start with, but feel free to play around with them. So now we can actually add the button script to the game object. So we're gonna add a new Udon behavior, and program source is gonna be impressive button. For this button, I won't be changing any of the checkmark settings, but I definitely want some sound on this button. So I'm gonna go into my sounds folder and choose for the navy sounds, because I really like those clicky buttons. So we're gonna drag navy press into the on press sound and navy depress into the on depress sound. So let's add the physical parts of our button. This is gonna consist of 3 parts: the button top, that defines the top of the button, a slider, which is the moving physical part of the button, and the base, which is the surface that the button sits on. So I'm gonna right click my new game component and create a cube 3D object. Then you can rescale that button base to whichever shape or size you like. Though if you have a custom button model, you won't have to do any of this, of course. With the base done, we can now add the actual button part of the button. So on my game component, I'm gonna right click again and create a new 3D object. I'm gonna make this a spherical button, so I'm gonna go for sphere. And resize it to an appropriate size. I'm also going to add some materials to make it more obvious. Now that I'm happy with the look, I'm going to add the top of the button, which will be an empty game object, which is going to be a child of the main game object. Like that. This top will have to be positioned at the very top of the button itself. So about like that. That's pretty much the top of the sphere, so that's going to be the top of my button. Then I'm going to take that sphere and make it a child of my top game object. And I'm going to rename these to make it more obvious as well. With the physical part of the button done, I now need to define how high and low the slider can go inside the button. To do this, we can go to the top game object and take the Y value that we already have right there in the transform. This number defines the highest point of our button, so this is going to be the most it will ever be extended. Then after copying this Y value, we can go into the game object with the impressive button script and paste that number into the button top high point. In order to do the lowest point of the button, we go back to the top and we drag the button down until it reaches a point that we think is a decent point for the button to bottom out. I think this is about okay for me, so I'm gonna copy this Y value, go into the game object and paste that number into the button top low point. Then we need to quickly move our button back to where it belongs, which is that number, and put our top back to that, so it's in its default position. We're almost done now. We just need to take the top and slider game objects and put them into their respective fields on the impressive button script, like this. And for the final step, we need to resize the box collider on the main game object so that it encapsulates our button perfectly, which in our case is going to be 0.2 on each axis, if I remember correctly. As you can see, the button is not quite encapsulating the top of our button, so we're going to have to move it up a little bit. Like about there is going to be okay, I think. The final thing we want to do is make sure that our button is the correct size and that the box collider is set to a trigger. So right now it is not a trigger, which means that players can run into the button, which is not what we want. So we want to set that to trigger, as well as on our base and our slider. That way people won't have any issues that they can't walk through your button, for instance. So let's hop into VR and see how that works. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that it was of some help to you. I want to thank and welcome my newest Patreon members, Radically, Matthew, Nana Bosho, and Gonzo. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, bye bye.